Hello, and welcome to Media.Monks Opinion. In every episode of IMO, we bring together experts in the field of digital marketing to discuss the challenges facing the industry today in order to deliver actionable insights that you can apply to your professional lives. Today, I am very pleased to welcome two smart, experienced, and talented digital marketing SMEs, Greg Hirschi of Otter Products and Greg Taylor of our own Media.Monks. My name is Brianna Mersey. I'm the Associate Director of Data at Media.Monks. And in today's episode, Changing Hearts and Minds with Data, we are going to explore the human side of technology transformation and how to build a data infrastructure that fosters collaboration and communication. For those of you who don't know much about Media.Monks, we are a digital-first marketing and advertising services company that connects content, data, digital media, and technology services across one global team built from the bottom up. Inspired by the connectivity and flexibility of technology APIs, a single P&L model offers clients seamless access to an 8,500 strong team of multidisciplinary digital talent across 57 hubs and 33 countries. Media.Monks works with 8 of the top 10 most innovative companies in the world, along with many other clients that span all the major industry verticals like CPG, automotive, retail, banking, and much more. If you want to know more about Media.Monks, please head to our website at Media.Monks.com. And if you have any suggestions about future episodes of In Amongst Opinion, please reach out to us at imo@Media.Monks.com. We'd love to hear from you. To set the stage a little, let's look at how data architects and digital marketers solve problems and envision success. As a data architect myself, I think it's fair to say that data architects and marketers look at projects and success differently. While data architecture can be complicated, the goals and benchmarks are fairly straightforward. We can objectively identify if we have completed a project successfully by checking that our data points are tracked, if we have our form submits, our clicks, our revenue, and our reports. The role of a marketer is perhaps not as nuanced. So, for example, the insights from the data need to be interpreted based on customer and brand knowledge. And there's a large aspect of insight and analysis, and it requires them to tell a story. So when you ask a data nerd like myself to visualize success after an implementation, for example, we see all the data is flowing through the correct channels seamlessly from our users' devices, the platforms, the apps, the websites, and it looks something like this. The data is going into the hands of the marketers with hearts because we're sending love so they can gauge the success of their campaigns. But on the other hand, this is how a digital marketer visualizes success. Data is more like a superpower that enhances the skills of the people on the team. They want to empower individuals, promote collaboration, and instill confidence so the team members can make good, smart decisions. Clean and organized data is a means to an end for this team, not the goal itself, like for the data nerds out there. So without enablement, teams might not embrace new technology and new ways of working. This brings me to our speakers today, who know a lot about bringing people and data closer together. Greg Hirschi and Greg Taylor work together very closely to transform Otter Products into a unified company ready for the next big leap. Starting with Greg Hirschi, would you both take a moment to share a little bit about yourselves, your background, your current responsibilities?
Sure. And thank you for having me. My name is Greg Hirschi. I am the Performance and Analytics Director at Otter Products. I've been there for about 10 years, and I've been with the marketing team for about the last year. Prior to that, I worked in supply chain and in operations on the customer service side. My background is really in operations and operations analytics, but my passion is in transformational leadership. How can we not only solve problems, but bring people together to help them embrace the solution in a way that's sustainable and meaningful for them?
Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Taylor. So typically when we're talking on internal calls, we just say H&T. So feel free to do that in the chat box today as well. But I'm Greg Taylor. I'm a VP of growth here at Media.Monks. Joined the company actually in 2016 when it was formerly Mighty Hive. So got started in account management. Prior to that, actually was the reason a lot of you might be following certain Facebook fan pages because I was growing those about 10 years ago in my previous agency experience. But today, ultimately, what I'm able to do is be able to help clients like Otter Products and stakeholders like Greg to be able to connect the dots across a number of their different marketing channels, combining some of that offline and online data, but then ultimately having the foresight for what the future could hold as well. So looking forward to today's discussion.
Great. Thank you both for the intros. So without further ado, let's jump into some questions. Greg H, let's set the stage with Otter Products. Do you want to give us a little bit of a background about how many employees you have, your global scale, the different products?
Yeah, absolutely. So Otter Products, many of you might be familiar with the brand. We're the case company. We make phone cases that protect your mobile devices. We were an industry leader in creating protective cases in conjunction with the rise of kind of the iPhone. We have roughly about 400 SKUs at any given time, sometimes up to 500 that we offer, but we do more than just cases. We're expanding product lines. We do drinkware. We also do coolers, and we've got a really interesting product called Livery. It addresses the last mile of delivery. When you think about like a Blue Apron type business or a wine of the month club that helps with that. So we do a lot of different things, but our core business is still cases and technology that supports the phone industry. We have about 1,000 employees, direct employees worldwide. But if you look at all the people that are working in our ecosystem, it's probably closer to 10 to 20,000 people. If you look at the suppliers that we work with, and a lot of the distribution channels that we work with. So we've got a fairly complicated business with lots of relationships, lots of selling channels, and also a piece of that that's direct to consumer. So that's kind of Otter Products in a nutshell.
That's great. Thank you for the overview. I'm sure everyone on the call knows Otter Products are great. What was the culture like at Otter Products 3 years ago? So if we look further back, before your journey to transform and become more data driven, can you talk about the state of the analytics? Were people using them?
Yeah, so we're kind of right in the midst of this cultural transformation. We're seeing really positive signs as we work with you guys. A couple of years ago, what we have at Otter Products, which is a really good thing and also has its challenges, we have a lot of empowered people who are ready to go solve problems. And that's kind of our entrepreneurial DNA. We grew from roughly about $100 million business to close to $1 billion in about 2 or 3 years. And when that happens, the technology and the infrastructure and the sustainability of the systems that help support that lag behind. They can't stay caught up. And so several years ago, we had a really reactive approach to data, and we still have that in some regards, but we're transitioning to a much more proactive state. But when we talk about reactive, what we mean is that we're just swimming in a sea of data. There's so many systems, there's so much information that people have access to, that oftentimes when we were making decisions, we were bringing different data to the table or bringing different sources of the same data that didn't reconcile. And it causes a lot of confusion and it causes a lot of frustration. We also saw a lot of mismatches where we would take production level data to answer executive type questions. And that's frustrating for the person bringing the data. It's also frustrating for the executive who wants a summary and wants to understand what things look like in aggregate. So a lot of mismatches around the use of data and driving value-added business decisions, and a lot of frustration from all parties is kind of what we were seeing and experiencing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Greg Taylor, T, do you remember the early meetings and the things OtterBox was looking to accomplish when you guys embarked on your journey over quite a few months ago? Can you share anything from that time?
Yeah. It was a number of different conversations. So it actually started right before the pandemic began. So they were the last client that I got to meet in person. And it was a really good conversation, understanding that they had a number of disparate data sources. They understood that, they weren't taking necessarily an integrated approach to their media planning and operations. So what they wanted to be able to do is to bring together those teams, whether that's creative, whether that's their in-house marketing teams, their outside agency partners, and other specific teams that are very important to driving the business forward. But I think at the same time, it was also a very good discussion really around what does the future of data even look like? A lot of it was very focused on marketing. And while that's nice, and while we can continue to push out specific products, we needed a more integrated approach to understand, is there potential overlap across these specific business units that Otter Products has? As Hirschi had alluded to earlier, they have a number of different products that really do have similar customers. So how can we ensure that we're not bidding on the same customer multiple times, showing them products that aren't relevant, or at the same time, how can we re-engage folks that might have lapsed from previous months or even years? So very early on, it was more of a discussion around how do we take an integrated approach to not just marketing, but also data holistically to be able to solve a lot of the problems that they had.
Was there anything you saw or you wanted to accomplish that you thought might not be possible, that was in your sort of back pocket that you were hoping for but weren't sure?
I think it was definitely the analytics portion of it. I think it was something that I knew that they had a very good understanding of. They're very reliant on their distribution partners, but at the same time, you think about ownership of data. You continue to push these themes and understand that, as we go further into privacy, especially with CCPA out of California and other states following suit, what does that mean for Otter Products in terms of first-party data sets? What does that mean for user consent? So analytics was always the thing in the back of my mind where I thought that we could really start to push this needle forward and really bridge that gap between marketing and ultimately data warehousing as well.
Yeah, fair point. So to you both, let's quickly run through the technological changes. Did you need new hardware, software, cloud integrations, third-party vendors? What did it look like?
So I can answer first, and then Greg is much better at this than I am, so he can correct anything I miss. So back me up, T. I like to think about it in really simple buckets. The first piece is just the executional tools. And the Google ecosystem has a really good set of executional tools. When you talk about Campaign Manager, SA360, DV360, those are important to have. And I think our strategy is such that we want to have ownership over that source data, even though we've got agencies executing in them. We want to make sure that we maintain continuity all the way from the beginning of the execution. And then you've got kind of your middleware, which would be your GA360 and your big data query, where you can take that data, you can consolidate, it gives you a consolidation point and a way to transform it. And then it gets into our ecosystem that we own and run, our data warehouse, where you can push it to there. Then the last piece would be taking outputs from various levels of that data technology infrastructure and using those to answer value-added questions from the users. So we've got the front-end execution piece, kind of that middleware piece of big data query, pushing into our data warehouse. And then you've got kind of a component of visualization and trying to figure out how you can make sense of everything. And we had to replace the execution piece and the middleware piece. We already had some of the data warehouse piece and some of the visualization tools on our end. So that was kind of the approach that we took and what we had to replace.
Yeah, and I think you covered it well in terms of the specific platforms. I think the key call out here also was just ensuring that we can integrate with the different data sources that they already had. So not necessarily ripping or replacing everything, but how can we complement what they were already doing in social? How can we complement where they're already storing data outside of even BigQuery? And then ultimately with on-prem systems, what data do we need to pull out of there to be able to get a full view of the customer journey as well?
One other point there for those who are struggling with this, because this is probably key to our journey, our ERP system is a big deal for that. So the ERP system that we run and the data we get from our third-party vendors helps us to answer those non-direct consumer data questions. And that can be complicated and frustrating, but it's key to make sure that that's integrated to answer these advanced questions.
Good tip. And then once you guys had your MarTech stack decided, you found the missing integrations, you have that laid out, did you anticipate which teams would be affected or impacted when you got started or when you dived in?
Yeah, that's one of the things I think is critical for understanding how to make these big changes is understanding the landscape or the org chart. And for us at Otter Products, we have a pretty complicated landscape because we're a consumer products good company. So we're not just doing the marketing, but we're building, designing, manufacturing and distributing all of that as well. So we've got a lot of different people that care about what's happening in the marketing. So we were very intentional about understanding who those stakeholders are within the marketing function and outside of the marketing function, and then breaking those stakeholders into different levels or buckets. Who are the executive level that we need to influence? Who are the middle management, the directors, the managers that need to be influenced? And who are the contributors that this impacts directly or incidentally? And how can we reach out to speak with them to help build consensus on the need for this change and then bring them along as it's happening? So it was pretty intentional.
Speaking of people and the teams, can you talk about like the different personality types that you were introducing change to and maybe how they reacted?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say that we're probably no different than any other company. Like you've got a bell curve of personalities. You've got some people that react well and want to jump in and have it happen yesterday. And you've got other people that are a little bit more cautious and hesitant. Their adoption curve lags quite a bit. So balancing those in those different levels is pretty key, and understanding who your early adopters are at your executive function, who are your early adopters in your middle management function, your contributor function, and what are the critical paths to making these changes so they can start to see results. I think the key is you look at the crossing the chasm theory, is finding those early adopters and finding those wins and helping empower them to get to your early majority. It's a big deal, and managing that is not easy to do when you've got different personality types.
Mm-hmm. Did you find there were early adopters in all different teams, or was there like one, maybe the data team or one team in particular that had more or less?
That's a really good question also. I think it's a combination of finding people that are passionate. So like working where the passion is really important. If somebody is passionate about the change and they can see the value proposition, they're always kind of on that core team. And then the other thread that I try to work through is looking for key areas or functions where there can be a big impact, and trying to challenge myself and trying to challenge the team to tie themselves to that vision. So we've got, for us, like our digital media team is key. They do so much of this work and it impacts their day-to-day job. Partnering with them early on was really apparent that we needed to work with them and partner with them. And luckily we've got people that can see the vision and we're really engaged, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't disruptive or that it wasn't challenging to start to make some of these changes. So we had to figure out how to work with them in a way that minimized the disruption and how to empower them to be a part of this decision-making team so that we're not just behind the curtain making all the decisions and then kind of pop out and say, hey, we fixed all your problems. I hope you like the way we fixed it. It's pretty important to make sure that they're empowered, that they have a chance to be a part of that team. And then other key stakeholders like our IT team, our data warehouse team. You look at, with us, the way we're structured, we have parts of consumer marketing that roll up into sales, into channel marketing, and they're also key stakeholders. So working all of those threads and trying to stay focused on the critical stakeholders and also getting input continuously to understand where some of the secondary stakeholders are can be a difficult proposition. It's always a moving target, but it's a combination of finding where the passion is and then helping maybe people to find the passion or find what inspires people that are in key positions.
So it sounds like there was potentially a cultural change. Like this passion was almost the cultural change that maybe shifted the team into a different way of looking at the project. Is that sort of what needed to happen?
Yeah, I think in some regards, parts of it had already taken place when I took this role. There were people that understood the change or understood the need, but maybe didn't see how it was going to happen. And so a lot of it was trying to lay some framework to help them see this is potentially how it could happen. And then giving them a chance to be a part of that framework. So not telling them what the answer was, but inviting them to review the draft of milestones. Here's how we think this can work. What do you think about this? And what I find effective in helping stakeholders work through changes, asking them what their concerns are, or asking them openly, here's the plan. How do you think this is going to fail? Tell me what you think will make this not work. What is going to make you most nervous about this plan? When you can find their passion, whether it's a positive emotion or a negative emotion, you can either uncover engagement that drives a project forward. They're going to line up and push it forward, or they're going to tell you, here are the emotions that will hold me back from giving you my engagement. And when you can find those emotions that hold them back, it's what I found to be most helpful in kind of removing those roadblocks, those emotional roadblocks that help them decide how they want to engage. So we've gone through that process with a lot of these stakeholders to figure out, what does that look like for an executive? What does that look like for a director? What does that look like for a manager? What does that look like for a contributor? And it's a lot of stakeholders to think through. And that's a lot of meetings to have, but it does help kind of grease the wheels for a sustainable, systemic, strategic change.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice to those facing similar situations, like the engagement and breaking down the stakeholder groups and addressing those concerns for each of those groups, and really inviting participation and not like a top down, this is the way it must be, to get them on board. So it makes sense. Greg Taylor, from your perspective and your point of view as the point person at a digital agency, how did you feel your role was to assist Greg Hirschi in this big project and cultural change for them?
Yeah, so I think historically, when people think of sellers, they're just, all right, they're going to push a contract to me, we're going to sign it, and then they're going to leave me high and dry. That couldn't be further from the truth of my approach. So, with my background being in fulfillment, understanding these platforms in and out, understanding where there might be stop gaps or challenges, it's my really job to make sure that the clients understand what they're really getting into. During the pre-sales process, me and Hirschi had a number of different conversations of where we would imagine, hey, this will probably be a slower roll than another platform, or this initiative can supersede those accordingly. I know as we start to talk about econometrics modeling, very big idea, but it takes a long time to actually get to the goal because there are systems that need to be in place. There are floodlights or pixels that need to be updated. There are teams that need to be brought up to speed on what exactly we're trying to do here. And everyone needs to be aligned on what attribution and measurement truly means. So throughout the entire process, as questions have come up, as we have our ongoing syncs, I think it's been very critical for me to provide any additional insight or best practice expertise as I have seen fit. Of course, as we experience new challenges, I'm going to loop in additional SMEs across our various teams, but being really connected at the hip to what Hirschi's doing, to what other key stakeholders that he's identified as being owners of a specific initiative need to accomplish has been very key to the success that we have already had. But in general, I would say just being able to plug and play where necessary is what has led to the success thus far.
Awesome. Greg Hirschi, did you guys have to internally create any new positions for some of the teams, some of the work streams that you didn't anticipate?
Yeah, so my position was new for this specific reason. So I moved within OtterBox to help with this work for this purpose. So that was probably the first position. And a lot of that was driven because of the need to better connect to those executive leaders. I think there was an acknowledgement of us being able to better meet the financial impact of what was going on in marketing. So we had data that we could bring, but tying it back to the P&L from a leading and lagging indicator standpoint was difficult. And our executive team really wants our marketing team to focus on the numbers. That's the verbatim phrase that they've given us. We want you to focus on the numbers and be data driven. And what that means for them, and they've given us specific use cases, is that they need to be able to ask us, if we have a revenue gap that we're trying to cover on our demand plan. This came up in a meeting last week. Our CEO said specifically, I want to be able to turn to the CMO and I want to be able to say, we've got a $5 million gap because of timing or world circumstances or whatever it is. How much marketing investment do I need to be able to cover that gap? And he wants to be able to get an answer that is meaningful, that we have confidence in, that will drive an outcome that he's looking for. In our data circumstances that we have, the ones that we're moving away from, we can't answer that question. There's no confidence in that. So we've got to be able to have the structure to support that. That is my role. It's also a headcount that we've got approved to help with data science work so that we can continually answer these questions at the strategic level. And then we've also got an analyst that reports to me that's helping with data literacy. So tying out that tactical level of question answering to the strategic level of question answering. So we've got kind of a strategic bucket and a tactical bucket. And we're trying to work on improving that data literacy with the tools that we're building out and implementing. So a lot of different structure changes needed to help with this.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about results. Now that the project's underway and going strongly, like how are you guys measuring success?
That's a really good question. There's a couple of ways that I measure it. And when it's in, I'm going to give you the in-flight way that I measure success. And then I can talk to how we're going to measure success as things continue to roll out and we start to see results. Let me talk about that first, the results side. I think the results side is really important when you talk about data and analytics and numbers. If you can't show improvement and you can't show it in the right areas concisely for the right audiences, then it's the tree that falls in the forest when nobody's around. So what we're trying to do is match the right people with the right information at the right times. And that means that we've got specific plans in place to be able to measure performance by level, by function. And when I say specific, it doesn't mean I have a spreadsheet with everything we're tracking. We do have a spreadsheet that has some of the things that we've got that we need to work on. But at a higher level, we've got some concepts that we believe are going to meet our end user needs. And that's based on conversations with those users. Here is what you're asking. Here is the pain that you're seeing and the value proposition that you're looking for. And then we've got a milestone that we think will meet that need. And we're collaborating with those end users. We're showing them, here is the working model of what we think we're going to deliver. Does this meet your needs? And it's three basic projects for us. One is data science to answer strategic questions. The other one is campaign management with a portfolio contribution twist, where we're not just looking at a campaign and the standard that we're trying to hit or the success standard that we're trying to hit, but how can we take a cut across all evergreen campaigns, all actively managed campaigns, compare them by funnel type, and then calculate a weighted contribution to empower those users to really make decisions based on the data they're getting, and not just comparing digital media to digital media. How can we compare digital and email and PR and all the other places that we're serving media? How can we compare them and their contributions against each other to provide a more holistic view? And that can be a scary proposition. When you're talking with stakeholders and they see comparisons, they get really, really nervous about losing resources. And that's not the name of the game. So you've got to manage that concern. And we can talk more about that if people are interested. But the last one is what I call audience performance management, but that end consumer data, that first party data. We have access to a lot of first party data, and we want to stitch that together. And there are pockets where it's not stitched together as well as it could be. But if we can stitch that together, we can really drive and influence our customer lifetime value, not just for our direct consumer business, but for our holistic business. There's assumptions we can make and inferences that we're comfortable making that will help us see how our greater consumer is being impacted by the processes of our digital marketing team or our email team or our customer service team. And we know it's having an impact. We know that the customers that don't buy from us are coming and interacting with us either before they buy or after they buy. So unlocking that value proposition, bringing the numbers to the table, helps us drive results. And all of the plans that we have in place are to bring those numbers to the table and measure the results against a standard of excellence. The in-flight measurement is much more emotionally based. The way I gauge success right now is meeting with each one of those stakeholders who has a vested interest in one of those milestones and looking at the productive disequilibrium that's in place. And that's a fancy way of saying, are they engaged and are they working collaboratively for the vision that we have? And what do we need to do to manage that productive disequilibrium? So it means they're uncomfortable enough that they're growing, but not so uncomfortable that they give up. And that's what I'm looking to do, is manage their engagement. And if their engagement is healthy, then it's just a matter of time before we can produce and measure results in real time.
But I just want to know a bit more about the collaboration. Like, how are you able to get those teams, maybe the ones that were more disengaged, to collaborate and like enhance the workflows between them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When we look at our functional teams within marketing, we had several functions. We had one function that was kind of already leading out in taking ownership over reporting. We had another function that was doing the same, and a third that was less engaged. And I think the key was starting to understand where the pain points are and where the misses were in our previous state of operations. What was happening was that when we went and started to ask them questions and started to see the pain points that they were explaining, the previous solutions that were being offered to them weren't meeting their needs. So, it was we were taking, in some regards, the if you build it, they will come mentality. They were being served solutions and not listened to. So a lot of the shift has been trying to understand, what is it that makes your role successful? How can we help empower you to be better at your work? And then coming back and saying, well, what if we gave you something like this? Would that help meet your need? And many times the solution, it's something that's already known. It's out there in the industry, or it's a best practice, but it's got to be seen as a best practice through their eyes. That's the key. So until they believe it's a best practice, you don't have their engagement. If you can tell them all day long this is a best practice, and if they don't believe you, it doesn't matter. So the key is finding a way for them to realize it's a best practice and then tying it together to that strategic solution. And one of the things I like to focus on is sustainability. So when you talk about big technology changes and data-driven marketing, most of the disengagement that I see is because solutions are not sustainable. And what that means is that somebody has to go pull a report off a production system, and then they have to manipulate it somehow. They put it in Excel, and they either have to use it the way that it's presented, or they have to spend a lot of time and effort cleaning up the data. And we're asking marketers, who are usually not analysts, they don't live and breathe Excel, to do this. And once you create Excel hell, they disengage. They're out. They don't want to do it. So helping them see that if we do some of these things, we can remove Excel hell and we can answer your questions. You can open up a Power BI spreadsheet and you can hit refresh and have everything all in one spot. Or take the time to educate them and show them, to answer this question, you can go to the production system canned report. To answer this question, you should go to GA360. To answer this question, you should go to our data warehouse and the interface that we have there. So lighting people up with the source of information for their grain is pretty important. And then helping them see the value proposition for that is also really important. It's that matching principle of right people, right time, right data. That has to be right, and they have to see it, and they have to believe that it's going to help them. If they don't believe, it doesn't really matter what you do.
Right. They won't go back to the Excel hell. So is the work done? Do you guys have ongoing processes that you're continually improving? What does the future look like? How are you guys feeling?
So this is a super timely question, because I think there's 31 days in March, if I remember right. So in March, we're finishing the last of our Google marketing implementation. So our campaign manager, all of our campaigns will go live. And that is a super critical inflection point for us. We've got some really good report designs. We've got some concepts that are in flight that we believe we've got good traction on, that end users are excited about seeing. Once that goes live, then we can finish our data warehouse integrations and we can start to build those out. Right now we can mock them up, but what we want to do is build them out and show the end users these are sustainable, and see what they look like. And I think about it this way. I want to see what the data and the analytics look like in the wild. So when they come in contact with this in their day-to-day roles, when they're using this with their one-on-one conversations or with their meetings with VPs or whatever their sphere of influence is, I want to see, is it valuable? And I want to hear from them, is this making your life better? And that helps us manage that productive disequilibrium when they can see the results. If they can see the results and they're making better business decisions and they can see that, it grows their data literacy. And we're right at that point where we're starting to show them those numbers. And we're doing it for the data science. We're doing it for the media campaign management in the next couple of months. So it's a fun and exciting time to see the feedback in the wild.
Yeah, and working on future proofing with GA4 too. I know you guys are rolling that out globally, so that's big with all the new announcements. So you guys are ahead of the curve, working on preparing for that update with GA. So that's great too. Greg Taylor, do you want to add anything like in terms of your point of view, assisting and supporting? How are you feeling with the project and the improvements and your position on the future for Otter?
Definitely. So I think working very closely with their marketing teams has been a big initiative over the past couple of months. Understanding what is the taxonomy and the approach to data governance has been a key area of focus. I think, as a team internally at Otter Products, they're very organized. They understand what they're trying to get out of it. But at the same time, the challenge historically has been that we've been relying on third-party agencies or outside vendors. So how do we actually start to, bring our team members up to speed on best practices, ensure that everyone is getting the specific outputs from whether that's campaign reporting, whether that's analytics, so that way teams can come together and collaborate even more effectively in the future. I think for their media teams, they've definitely asked the right questions. They've continued to really push the needle, even with their partners. I think one area of growth that I've seen is them really just taking ownership of the partnership. Historically, I think a lot of in brands or marketers have been relying on those agency partners to be able to dictate exactly how things should be done. But for Otter Products, they now know that they're at an inflection point where, hey, you know what? We're the ones with the customers. We're the ones really spending the media dollars here. So why can't we have a say in exactly how the data should be coming through or what data should be made available? Today, we're talking about obviously the Google Marketing Platform stack, but we all know that Otter Products are sold across big box retailers across the nation. So when we start to think about what data warehousing and the future state of that looks like, there's larger conversations to be had here. And I think now that this team understands what they're looking for, they now can be a unified front as they do start to have these more in-depth discussions around really access to data, and then ultimately taking ownership in what the users truly want to see from the brand 3 years, 5 years, even 10 years down the road.
Thank you. So we have a couple questions from the audience. So the first question is, how did data shape not only your approach to media, but also your approach to creative development?
Okay, this is a really good question. I presented at our marketing all hands meeting last Friday. So this is 3 or 4 days ago. And this exact question came up. And it's something that I'm going to go and talk with that team more about in depth. There's a long answer and a short answer. The short answer is that we have plans to make sure that we can do this. And there's ways that it can be done. And we're going to work with the team to do that. We need to do that in conjunction with where we get the right value proposition for our implementation. So there's specific parts of that value proposition that we've got to address before we get to this piece. And I want to talk about how we're addressing them and then talk about what we know about how we can address this also. A lot of our approach is top down, meaning that we believe that answering the questions at the top will have a bigger impact on the organization as a whole and all the end users than starting from the questions at the bottom up. So this specific creative development question would be a bottom up question. And the reason why, and this is different by company, so it may be different for your company, is that those top down questions are the resource specific questions. They're the questions that allow us to understand how many dollars are we going to spend and which categories are they going to be spent on. And when we can answer those questions and coordinate strategically at the top, we influence strategically and relieve a lot of pressure in the system. There was a lot of back and forth several years ago about how much are we going to spend and is that the right number? And that creates a lot of swirl and churn emotionally in the department. We want to be able to answer that question so we can relieve that emotional swirl and churn. And that's a category and size question. When we get to this question specifically, part of this will be answered in that media campaign management structure that we're talking about. So when we can see active campaigns in flight and we understand the creative that's attached to them, we give our teams the ability to understand where specific creative is having an influence and where it's not, and to start to discern specifically what's driving performance there. So that's probably the piece that's on the roadmap. And then I think as we get deeper into this, we'll collaborate with those teams to work specifically on which collateral, which asset is tracking against specific performance, and try to dive into supporting them through those tools. So that's definitely kind of the medium to long-term goal, is to support those teams directly. And then the short-term goal is to make sure they have the resources they need to do their job, and then to give them some medium-range tracking to help them see directionally the trends of what they're putting out there in the marketplace and how it's influencing campaigns from a contribution standpoint. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. Another question for you. Were there any surprise benefits you were not expecting?
Oh, absolutely. And here's my little plug for Greg and for Media.Monks. Whenever you're doing something complicated, and marketing is complicated, there are many systems, complex data flows, and to make it sustainable and to have a competitive advantage of data-driven marketing, you have to manage across all of that. I think it's always key to understand what your strengths are and then have a humble confidence, meaning like we can leverage the strengths that we can bring to the table, and also recognize that we don't have all the answers. And finding a partner that's willing to ask questions and push you has been a great surprise. I think we had every indication that was going to be the case. We look for that with agency partners, with working with you guys, with other partners that we work with. That collaboration is key, and seeing it come to fruition kind of always warms my heart. So it's not just Greg, it's you, Brianna, it's the team supporting. When you're willing to engage to help raise the data literacy of our marketers, to learn more about our business when it's a two-way street, that gets me really excited. You know, there's inclinations that it's there. We hope we make the right choice, but when it comes to fruition, that always makes me happy. The other place that I see it is with the data science team that we work with. They are top notch. And there's times when I bring up concerns, what about this, what about that? And their process is really buttoned up. It's been refined over time, and being able to leverage their learnings across other clients and understanding what they see has made this successful other places and sustainable, and to replicate that has been a pleasant surprise. That it's not just a crunch the numbers and leave approach, but building something that we can leverage over and over and over again, and a willingness to help us build that so that we can sustain it internally. And the expertise in doing that has been just an amazing surprise. So usually it's around the expertise and the things that we're not as savvy at. Those are usually where we're pleasantly surprised.
Well, thanks for that feedback. That's always good to hear. I'm very pleased to support you guys. So we have one last question from the panel. What do you think convinced the most stubborn team members to start using the new platforms?
That is a good question. There's two keys. One is really good executive sponsorship. And then the second one is leadership sponsorship. So managers and directors, those are your keys. And let me explain just the cultural dynamics of convincing difficult to sway people. When you talk about convincing a contributor, you can go and have the conversation. And if they're super engaged, it's not a problem. They'll go and work with you, and that works out great. If they're not, a few things will happen. They'll either just disengage and won't do anything, or sometimes they'll go and they'll talk with the people they feel comfortable with, or they'll go and they'll complain to whoever they report to. And then that goes up the chain of command. You want to be looking for those things, and you want to make sure that you've got a buttoned up vision that touches on each one of those levels, so that when those conversations come up, you've got a friend in marketing or someone who they might talk with that can help them maybe see what they're not seeing. You want to make sure they've got a manager that can help them understand the vision. You want to make sure you have a director that can help them do that. And ultimately a CMO who is willing to go and set an overall message for the department. Our CMO stood up and said, numbers are important for us, and this is a big initiative. We need to focus on the numbers. This is what our executive team wants. And here's how it will impact you. It's going to help us get you the resources that you need. Having the top cover, having someone proactively say that helps quite a bit before you get to the disengagement at the contributor level. So you've got to have all those messages kind of out there and the expectations set. And then you want to continually revisit them and check that engagement at all levels. If you're doing that, if you're setting the expectation, you're checking in on the engagement, and you're looking for either more engagement or less when it moves up and down, you've got a pretty good plan, but it's got to happen. You've got to be monitoring all of those continuously. Or when one gets out of whack, the whole system starts to fall apart, and the change becomes less meaningful.
Good advice. Really good advice, I think. We have one last question that came in. First, kudos to the journey you've been on and the success with Greg at Media.Monks. As you separate the emotional from rational thinking and key decision-making with the power of data, how often will you be revisiting the measurement framework to ensure the KPIs are still truly key in driving your business on a daily, weekly, and monthly frequency?
So I love this question. The cadence is key. If you get cadence wrong, you either overburden them or you disengage them. So I think our goal is to do this in the right cadence that drives the value for the end user. And I can tell you what we're going to start with roughly. When we talk about our data science, it's going to happen at least biannually, and the goal is to probably move it to quarterly. And it needs to sync up with our financial budgeting and review process, or annual planning, and then the key points in our company where we review high-level strategic budgets. We have to be able to come to the table when those conversations are happening, when the iron's already in the fire and people are ready to move money around because the strategy has changed or the market has changed. So we're trying to line up our data, the information that we can bring from a data science standpoint, with that process. It's an internal process that already exists. And I can say the same thing for portfolio management. I can say the same thing for contributor reports. There's a lot of processes that already exist. They're organic. They're already out there, living, breathing. Part of my job is to go find them and to help my team find them and figure out how to make them better. We don't have to just start something new and give them something brand new. We want to tie in what's already working on the cadence that's already working. So for our managers, when we talk about portfolio management, when we talk about e-commerce performance, they already meet monthly. There's forums they already have where they come together and review this. Our goal is not just to introduce a new forum. Let's leverage that monthly forum and let's give them a much better tool to make decisions and to collaborate. So a lot of that media campaign management, performance review will probably be monthly. And then when you talk about contributor information, that's more of a weekly, daily type grid. And usually that comes off production systems. So that's a lot of self-service. But we don't want to leave that to chance. We want to make sure that we're meeting with them, that we help them with data literacy, help them understand what the information looks like. We've got people who are not just building aggregated reports, but they're understanding data mappings. And they can go in and say, hey, let's talk about this specific metric. You're using this. Have you considered using this instead? Because this ties better to the message we're talking about at the director level. And this is how we're making decisions at that level. Is this an easier thing for you to use? So I think a lot of it just depends on how it's being used. But for us, it'll be biannually, quarterly for data science. It'll be monthly for most of that middle management structure for the higher middle management. And then we get into weekly and daily, depending on who's executing and in the system.
Yeah. And to add to that, their team has done a really good job of understanding where the feedback loop is also going to take place. So you could be working across all these different silos, as Greg had just alluded to, but at the end of the day, there needs to be a constant. There needs to be a group of individuals or stakeholders that understand, you know what, how does this report stack up to my other team members across the organization? So I think the feedback loop is just something always to consider, whether that's around your audience strategy, your creative strategy, your category planning, as Greg has talked about before, in general, because we don't want it to necessarily just stop with the team that's responsible for managing the day-to-day budgets. It needs to go all the way up to the C-suite, but at the same time, the cadence is going to be very critical to ensuring that you're always recalibrating what those KPIs really mean.
Let me just add one piece there. This wasn't in the question, but I'm going to throw it out there as food for thought. Where I see a lot of marketers get confused is the correlation between leading and lagging indicators. A lagging indicator being financial performance, P&L impact, and a leading indicator being an operating metric that pre-indicates financial performance. Helping teams understand which ones they're accountable for is pretty important. And helping them understand where to measure them and what grains to look at them on kind of helps them, it improves their data literacy, but it gives them the decoder ring to be a more valuable player when they come to the table and talk about performance. So that's a lot of what we're working through. It's not just when do we talk about this, but making sure that they have the right leading indicator and that they understand how this leading indicator ties to financial performance. Is it a revenue driver? Is it a cost savings? What does it look like? And can they explain that? And that's a different conversation for each person.
Great. Well, we've come up to the end in our time, and I just wanted to thank you both very much for your insight, your tips. It's great to hear about your journey and some of the obstacles you've overcome with your with the people and the technology together, and how it's working out in the long run. So thanks so much again, and we really appreciated having you both.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk with everybody.